panel discussing mediation and ODR. Will they emerge as new and efficient mechanisms for dispute resolution in India? So while alternate dispute resolution as a concept is something that we've all been discussing for years on the go, there are a few aspects which keep evolving with every new year or every new season. And one of the aspects that is getting discussed a lot these days when you're talking about alternate dispute resolution is dispute resolution through online means or online dispute resolution. And we have got some excellent panelists here to speak about online dispute resolution. So let me start with Rajneesh first, which is that you do hear a lot about online dispute resolution these days. There's a fair bit of discussion surrounding this. Now, to start with, it would be good to understand from you as to what are the reasons for ODR emerging as the new buzzword in the dispute resolution space in the last couple of years. And also to follow that up, how is it really different from the other modes of dispute resolution, particularly say an arbitration that you do through virtual hearings, and what gives it a unique space in the whole realm of dispute resolution? So to start with, so that we can all get familiarized with the concept.
Understood. Thank you. Firstly, a big thank you to MCIA. I think this is the third year running. They've been doing a session on ODR. Very thankful to them for recognizing this so many years ago. This is at least the third one I'm attending. So thank you so much for that. I will answer the second part of your question first. So there are three ODR founders, and Tara's been in the mediation space as well. I think it's been a journey for us for at least 4 to 5 years. I know Akshetha has been there for a very long time. So ODR is not something new. ODR is not a buzzword. For us, it's been a journey, and we are now seeing it get recognized. But what I would say from an insider's perspective, ODR is here and the train's left the station. All of the discussions in the last session around the rules of arbitration and who writes the awards and how data is collected, a bunch of the ODR platforms are already practicing them. When we do ODR, and I'll talk about what ODR is. ODR is the same as ADR. It is normal. It is essentially doing arbitration, mediation, or conciliation through online means. But certainly it's not enough to put a camera on a device and talk to people. It is definitely more than that. You've got Teres here, which COD has been pioneering for a while, which is transcription. I know that at Carter we've been trying languages to bring inclusivity. And so there's a lot of these things which go into ODR. It's an extension of alternate dispute resolution channels, which much more inclusivity and getting people into it. So I think it is not, it's not something new. It is not a buzzword. As I said, the train's left the station. A lot of the things are already happening. For example, the use of AIR and things like that. So it's no different from any other means of dispute resolution. It is using technology. It is using, and let me give an example, right? UPI, nobody today talks about why UPI and why not cash. And I think the day today is now where ODR, why not? And it's literally that moment for us in the ecosystem. So that's my answer to this. It's no longer a buzzword. It's normalized. It's arbitration or mediation or conciliation or any form of dispute resolution using technology to do a lot of the low-end tasks, and I would dare say also to do the decision making, and that day is not far.
Thanks, Rajneesh. That does set the context with respect to online dispute resolution as an extension of any other form of dispute resolution. Just again to set the context with respect to mediation, and if I may come to Tara, you on this. You know, the way Rajneesh mentioned that, you know, the train has left the station for ODR. What do you think about mediation? Because mediation is something which has been there forever. I mean, you know, the idea of, using mediation or amicable means of finding a solution to disputes is something which has always been part of the dispute resolution culture, whether you had it when you were looking at codes or even pre-codes. Always the idea of an amicable resolution was part of the system. But with the kind of complex contracts which was there, with the kind of the adversarial nature that has come into the dispute resolution in general, when you look at the dispute resolution in India particularly, where do you see mediation standing, in the sense that how is it evolving with the times? Is it something which is there, or is it something which still needs to catch up? And just the whole ecosystem of mediation, how would you look at it at this point in time?
Great question. Can you hear me? There you go. Great question, Tine. And I've been in the mediation space now for the past 7 years or so. And as I've reflected on this process, it's clear that this is a process that's not new to our culture. Historically, the way we resolve disputes was through collaborative processes. It's when the British came in and set up formal systems of the courts that the intuitive process that was in our communities flipped and changed into the formal processes of the court-based system, or the adversarial processes. If you reflect, your great-grandfather, your great-grandmother were all sitting under those trees and actually mediating. That's what they were doing. There was the role of the respected village elder that was there in every community, working with parties in dispute, conflict being an inevitable, necessary part of human interaction. Systems were in place to manage these conflicts. But somehow along the years, over the past 350, 400 years, we forgot those systems that were part of our cultures and our communities. And now we are in this mission basically to bring that back into the understanding of our communities. And cognitively too, I believe that we are at that change, we are at that place of our human evolution, where collaborative dispute resolution processes, where parties are able to understand what happened, why are you seeing this the way you are seeing it, why am I seeing it the way I am seeing it, and how do we figure out a way to find a solution. Our brains have also evolved to that point to be able to engage in these processes effectively. So looking ahead, this is the way to go. It's not to say that the other process, the adversarial process, doesn't have a place in our dispute resolution landscape. It's an important system and process to have as part of the resolution process. But it cannot and should not be the only way society manages conflict. We have to be able to, for the greater good of mankind, if I may say, it's a big statement, find ways to bring in these processes as part of our dispute resolution landscape. And it's amazing, from the time that I started in 2016, where people really didn't know the difference between mediation and meditation, we are at a place where we have an act in place that's unbelievable. In a 7-year span, we have moved to having an act that recognizes the mediation process, that gives the mediated settlement agreement the same validity as a court decree. That's huge progression in a short period of time. So, I mean, I fully concur with Rajneesh. The train has left the station. It's picking up momentum very, very quickly, and then watch the way it whizzes by.
So just again on mediation, and Tara, Akshetha, both of you can add in here, which is that, the way you have legislations which have come in over the years to sort of bring in ease of, say, an bringing ease to an adversarial dispute resolution process, be it saying that commercial codes, or be it saying that arbitration to be done in a time-bound manner, be it you finding other ways of finding a solution to your problem. How do you think these enactments, which are specialized legislations focusing on aspects of dispute resolution, how do they interplay with mediation as a concept or mediation as a tool for dispute resolution?
Any specific thing that you're referring to?
So I would say that both, two of the particular points that will come to my mind is that, one of the reasons why people say that, I would like to explore mediation is because it's quick. You see that, it's people's, with the help of a facilitator, you are trying to find a solution to the problem quickly. And it's also considered to be cost effective because you're not going through the entire process, which can be heavy on the pockets of the people. But when you try and bring in, say, timelines for conclusion of an adversarial process, be it arbitration, be it the court process, would that weigh down mediation as an option as against the adversarial processes, where people will start thinking that, the reason why I was looking at adversarial process, wasn't looking at adversarial process was because it is going to take 10 years for me to get a solution there. Let me find a solution in mediation. But if you were to get a quicker resolution in an adversarial process, would parties be willing to come forward with mediation? So I'm essentially trying to say that, the developments in law on the adversarial space, would that pull down mediation?
If our adversarial system was more efficient, would that create less incentive to mediation? You're right. At this point of time, one of the biggest reasons why people try mediation is because of the time and the cost factor of the formal process. But to me, yes, that's a distinct advantage of the process, but that's not the only advantage of the process. The advantage of the process is it supports resolutions that come from a place of understanding the needs of the parties in dispute. It's a needs-based process. And when you're talking about a needs-based process that's being engaged, the solutions that emerge are sustainable and transformative. So the ability could be transformative, but sustainable solutions emerge from a needs-based process. When you're looking at relationships that need to be preserved, and most, especially if you're talking about the commercial world, most of these relationships need to continue. So if you're looking at solutions that, one, allow sustainable outcomes, two, support relationships that are preserved in continued business relationships, three, allows expansion, allows the possibility of creativity, allows the possibility of innovation. All of that is possible through these kinds of processes. So yeah, cost and time are key factors as to why these processes are engaged. But there's much more than just that, the practical aspects of that merit the need for us to consider these processes more seriously.
Thanks for that, Tara. Moving back to ODR, and this is more to Vikas. And the whole point is that in the recent past, you've had the Niti Aayog consultation paper on ODR. And one of the aspects which comes out in the context of ODR and the consultation paper, or otherwise in discussions, is the question of what is the right amount of regulation that can go in when you're talking about ODR. Does it need to be codified? Does it need to come with strict rules of procedure to govern the process? How would you, address this dilemma? Because, at the one hand, it's important to keep the process a lot more agile to meet the needs of the businesses and meet the needs of the hour. But at the same point in time, we all understand that certain processes and procedures are important to secure the interest of the parties in terms of, each party getting the ability to present their position in the in the best manner they consider necessary for themselves. So, so therefore, where do you see this right balance being drawn between keeping it agile and not procedure driven versus having the right amount of procedure in place to balance the interest of justice or procedure or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tini. I think we need to start with the realization that ODR is a spectrum. That what Rajneesh was saying, doing an arbitration or a mediation online is as much ODR as automated dispute resolution, where an AI-based solution is telling you this is the outcome of the dispute. While recognizing ODR is a spectrum, I think it's also worth recognizing that different ends of the spectrum will require slightly different degrees of regulation. So for instance, if you're talking about just using virtual modes for conducting ADR, maybe no regulation is necessary. Maybe the tribunal or the mediators are more than capable of regulating process to adapt it to online means. And I think that's what's happening today with the high-value arbitration. So if you look at all the work that the IBA is doing, what UNCITRAL is doing, etc., you are looking at protocols coming in for the purposes of conducting virtual hearings. Of course, there are certain safeguards that need to be taken, which becomes more relevant for ODR than ADR. And these would be things like data protection, data localization. It could also be things like witness coaching and tampering, which becomes more possible in an online setting than it would have been in an offline setting. So certainly there are additional safeguards that are necessary. But I think that's on the end of the spectrum where regulation can maybe wait, because I think the Arbitration Conciliation Act is a fairly wide canvas which has enough safeguards that they can be tailored to the needs of ODR as well. And similarly mediation, because the mediator has far greater flexibility in terms of setting the boundaries. And so long as confidentiality, privacy are at the heart of it, you don't need extra regulation. But the minute you talk about the other end of the spectrum, where you're talking about decision making which is automated, there certainly you need a lot more regulation. And a lot more regulation, which the difficulty there is you don't yet know what the technology is, and you're trying to regulate what could be. And that is a challenge. And that we see as a challenge across board, not just ODR, whether it be regulation of aggregators, whether it be regulation of technology, the way it is done in the intellectual property space with generative AI. There will always be a catch-up that law will play with technology, because a lot more resources are being pushed into developing technology than developing law to cater to that technology. And I don't think that's something that we can wish away. There also, I think there is great need for broad guidelines and processes. So a lot of what was being discussed in the previous panel on how do we reduce biases. I think eliminating biases is impossible, so I don't even think we should aim for it. It's about acknowledging that there will be bias, and it's to account for it and ensure that that doesn't come in the way of substantive outcomes. It is about creating regulations which safeguard those. How does all of this interplay with where we are in ODR? I think with ODR, we are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, with some people closer to the end of automated dispute resolution, some closer this way. But there, I think, there will definitely be need for regulation in some aspects. For instance, we have in ODR ecosystem now, certain ODR players who might be promising results to certain people based on who their clients are. Say, for instance, you have ODR players who will go to, say, a bank and say, I will resolve all of these disputes for you. I will take my fees based on your recoveries. Now, that's a no-go. Right? And that's the kind of spectrum where you can't say, let's allow self-regulation in this space, let them do whatever they want. You need to set boundaries. And this becomes particularly relevant because you are now going into this ocean of not hundreds of disputes, not thousands of disputes, but millions of disputes. And unless you have some sort of ring fencing to say, these are bright lines, you cannot cross them, there will be a problem. But I think that's what they should be. There should be bright line ring fencing rather than detailed regulation of every single aspect, because that will stifle innovation. So it is that really careful balance of ensuring due process, ensuring justice and fairness, while also allowing for innovation. And I know that's a difficult balance, but I think it is possible. And that's where some endeavors that ODR institutions are taking, something that Rajneesh has been taking some lead on, which is to create an ODR alliance for some degree of self-regulation, might acquire some importance, because we know what we are doing and we know what can be regulated a little bit better than regulators who are still playing catch up. to what the technologies are doing.
Thanks, yeah, Vikas, for that. And in fact, I was about to come to you to request you to, step in and add on the self-regulation piece, because that's something which is extremely important, where you have a lawmaking that is coming from the stakeholders rather than the regulators playing the catching up game. And so where is that headed to, and where do we see the right balance coming there?
I'm just adding to what what Vikas has just said. Self-regulation, definitely. Ethical boundaries, definitely. And I think that's for the industry to do. But I think from a regulatory perspective, and somebody who deals with tech law fairly often, I think the current state of the Information Technology Act, and the Data Protection Bill will already have significant layers of security and protection to cover an ODR regime. We don't need anything more. Think of it today, digital payments on UPI are governed by the Information Technology Act. And they are super important things for our ecosystem. Same thing for ODR. Why can't they exist in just the Information Technology Act? The Act today covers everything else. Similarly, the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, as Vikas said, is already wide enough to embrace ODR, though I think it is already a part. So it's a natural progress. But I think the current state of the law with the Information Technology Act, with the Arbitration Act, and now with the DPDP Act, is sufficient regulation for this sector. You don't need anything more. What you do need is for the ODR players to sort of get together, have a self-regulation code like any other industry. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thanks, Rajneesh, for that. So Akshetha, just coming to you, and you are again uniquely placed in the sense that you do deal with mediation, you do deal with ODR, and you try and have a unique combination of both also offered, right? So where do you see in the future, in terms of, looking forward with respect to where you can have that right balance being drawn, depending on the nature of disputes, the interest of the parties, etc. Where can you, is it possible for parties, there are two parts to really what I want to understand from you. One is that, parties now provide for in their contracts that they will explore mediation before going into any other forms of dispute resolution. Similarly, how far do you think it is possible for the regulations or the regulatory framework to provide for that as a mandatory requirement? Like before you go file a suit, you necessarily need to have mediation. It's part of the law, how far that is really worked. And again, for, so where you bring in these requirements to have a mediation either contractually or by law, where do platforms like the ones that each of you are representing would come in and provide the necessary framework in support? Because it's important to have a quick means of providing that solution. It's also important to see that you're getting the right way of having it mediated or having an online solution for the problem. So, looking a bit into the future, where do you see all of this going? I know it's more like looking at the crystal ball and seeing where it is headed, but.
So, okay, so I think there were a few questions in there. So one was, it's a very hotly debated topic on whether it should mediation be mandatory, should it continue to stay because it's a voluntary process, should we just allow it to stay like that? And to be very honest, I'm still figuring out where I lean. I think maybe 60% is not mandatory, and I would just love to share my thoughts with the room and would be happy to take conversations or opposite opinions later. The one thing going through my mind is, hey, does India actually need that push right now to just make it mandatory so that everyone has access to the mediation process? And then we see how India and the relationship with India and mediation can really flourish. Taking from even what Tara was saying of how this is something we used to do. Do we just need to go back to our roots, and for that, do we need a push? But then the other side of my mind is just, so far, even at the work that we do in summer, we have managed to convince people to do mediations without there being a mandatory mediation requirement in place. So, and I think where that's coming from is the process in itself is so wonderful. What it offers for the parties. And if you just bring it down to conflicting parties, right? Do they want cooperation? Yes. Do they want good relationships? Yes. Does anyone want to stay in their conflicts? The answer has more often than not been no. No one wants to do that. So then when you're looking at this, the principles of mediation really encompass taking care of these aspects. So even with commercial courts being mandatory, I personally, has it really helped immensely in making sure that mediation has been adopted? I'm not very sure. Or I don't know if I just thought it would make a really, really big splash and it could just be my expectation setting. So I think mediation is just going to go forward irrespective. I think the faster we all realize that, I think it's just going to be easier, and that's where everyone's headed, whether that's your enterprises, whether that's your banks, whether it's individuals. So that's one piece of it. And with regards to, I think, the ODR players, to be really honest, what we all have in mind for ODR is the vision is so much bigger, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and we've had to actually spend a lot of time demonstrating that there is a case for ODR, you know? So the only thing I would say is to just watch how this space unfolds. What we all have in mind, we haven't been able to like put that into action day one because we really had to set the foundation to show there is a use case for ODR in India. And I think we've now reached that space where it's very clear that there is. So now moving forward, the true potential of what ODR can be and what these platforms can do, where all they can be integrated, it's not necessarily only an enterprise or a bank or just government bodies, but use cases that we've never thought of. Right? With all the services that are coming forward, which are enabled by technology, it is just obvious that you will need to have a technology-enabled dispute resolution process as well. So we're going to be taking care of disputes that we probably have never even looked at till date. By we, I mean all of us in the room. So I would just say that keep the excitement for ODR. We've demonstrated that hey, ODR is here to stay. And now is when we're going to have access to really, really putting technology and collaborative dispute resolution processes into really, really smart and like wonderful use cases.
Thanks, Akshita, for that. Now, I think I'm going to have a question open to all of you here, which is that, you know, and we spoke about biases earlier. I mean, maybe because of where we stand with respect to the understanding about ODR or just how it has been used until now, there is this perception that ODR is good for certain kind of disputes. So you perceive that, an online dispute resolution, you know, whether it is you having an AI coming in and stepping in and doing the work, or you know, doing away with oral hearings, etc., is good for certain kinds of dispute. You think that it's good for a small value dispute under a loan agreement, but you may not think that that's the best one to adopt when you're having a complex dispute under a technology transfer agreement. So where do you stand on this particular bias or thought process which is there? And I'll follow it up to also raise this with you, which is that what has been your experience as practitioners in this field on what are the kind of interesting or disputes or what you otherwise don't think as disputes that can get resolved through an online mode that you've come across, which sort of broadens the horizon for this mechanism. And we'd like to hear from each of you as to where you stand on this.
Thank you. No, as Akshita said, the horizon and the possibilities of ODR are immense. And we've got to get out of this mono thing of saying it's only good for lender and debt recovery disputes. And I'll take an example. You know, there are folks in this room who are used to filing their tax returns in paper form. I think 7, 8, 9 years ago, tax returns became digitized. And now you get a digital notice from the income tax office. Some of it may be nice with a refund, some of it may not be. But that is ODR, right? I mean, it is a machine looking at all the data that was filed with the government, and it is collecting from various parts on your income tax and sending you a notice. That age came 6 years ago, right? It's already here, and it's working fine, right? All of us get refunds on time, and all of us pay up the extra tax on time as well. So to me, that is also a form of ODR. You've also got to think of ODR as not just an arbitration conciliation, even though I made that definition earlier. For us, we look at ODR as more of grievance redressal and dispute resolution as well. And it will continue to go into those spaces. Some examples we've seen SEBI talk about ODR in the securities markets. It's a very sort of, it's a sleeper cell there. It's going to be one of the biggest areas of ODR in the days to come. And I mean, all the 3 ODRs are part of that process, have contributed in creating that. So securities markets where I told my broker to book my shares at X rupees and he sold it at X plus 1 and I made a loss, it's already happening. Those disputes are already coming in. You will see them get debt recovery, of course. I don't know, from the social media side, if any of you follow that industry, and I think it was spoken in the earlier section as well, social media disputes where you are fighting, why did my tweet or a coup or a Facebook post get deleted? Today, they are being sent up to the Grievance Appellate Committee, which is using ODR to do this. Under the DPDP Act, and most of my fellow ODR folks already know this, there are already calls from the government to use ODR in resolution of data protection disputes. So the canvas is massive. Employment disputes, wherever you need to do confidential disputes, where you need to provide access to folks using technology, languages, translations, absolutely right for ODR. These are some of the matrimonial disputes. Can you put ODR around it? I certainly think you can, with mediation coming into the fore. So these are some of the examples I had. I'd let others fill in as well.
I'd like to kind of respond to your question in 2 ways. One is the kinds of cases that we're seeing in mediation. There is a bias that mediation is largely for matrimonial disputes, high emotion disputes, or low value, small claims kinds of disputes. That's where mediation is actually being used. And as part of the use case scenario that we have experienced over the past 5 years, we have seen complex commercial disputes being mediated, IP disputes being mediated, maritime disputes being mediated, bankruptcy cases that we have mediated. So the idea that mediation is only for high emotion matrimonial kinds of cases, or for small value, small claims kinds of cases is where mediation works, I can very strongly and confidently say no. They work extremely effectively from a perspective of positive outcome, positive user experience, psychologically kinds of satisfaction, highly effective. Bringing the ODR piece of it in our kind of practice, up until COVID came in, we believe that you needed to do these processes in person. But it's been completely transformative. It's changed the way we practice. The ability for participants from various parts of the country, internationally, participating in the process, using technology in the form of, onboarding, etc., has become so easy. Storage of documentation in a confidential, secure way is so much more, is so much easier, efficient, secure, and in our practice, while we don't, we haven't gotten to the point of using AI and a lot more technology in the way we resolve, these are aspects where our practice can move. So ODR has also found its place strongly in our practice and very successfully.
I'll take on from there, and I think I'll talk about some of my experiences as a lawyer, and then maybe we'll talk about my experiences as COD. In the last 2 years, I've probably done about 4 international arbitrations, none of which I've had to go physically anywhere. And I think that echoes with everyone here in the room who have done the most complex matters in the most challenging environments virtually. And if we, in this room, even in our limited experiences here, don't see any reason why that can't happen, I think that's a very automatic answer to whether ODR is suitable for high-value disputes. Now, again, I go back to a point I made earlier, which is that ODR is a spectrum. So the question really is not whether ODR is relevant for high-value disputes, but to what extent can technology start replacing the hitherto routine norms and practices that were adopted. So that would mean physically assembling in a place. That would mean manually doing various tasks, including decision making. And I think that is where the more controversial questions will be. So for instance, you talk about civil law countries. In civil law countries, there's no question of trial, right? There's no question of cross-examination. There's no question of oral arguments. Everything is in written. Now, if 60–70% of the world resolves every single one of their disputes through documents only basis, and if ODR can enable that to happen far more seamlessly, then wouldn't ODR with everything that it offers not be amenable to resolving all kinds of disputes? And I think the answer is yes. Of course, there are disputes for which people will still want that personal element, and I'm sure Tara will also echo that, where there is a personal touch, there's a personal connect that makes a difference. And I think those will remain. Even in those, technology will start playing a role. Even in those, for instance, what we talked about in the previous session in document review, for instance, technology will start playing a role in terms of filing of documents, notification, issuing summons to parties, getting them all on board. All of those will still have technology penetration. Maybe that last mile of actual decision making, there might be some hesitation, and I think that's justifiable because there are complex areas of law where you don't want a machine to decide everything. So there will always be space for that. But I think even ODR players allow for that. It is about, in the most appropriate cases, if you think online doesn't work, please by all means go back to physical, but it's about changing the status quo. What is the default mechanism? You can opt out, but what is that the default that is, and that is online. And I think over the course of time, more and more disputes will start jumping into this bucket of what is online. And in this context, I actually want to talk about a little bit of what MCIA has done, which is well before COVID, if you looked at MCIA's facilities, they were among the first institutions I am aware of which came up with an extremely high-tech video conferencing system that was set up in their Bombay offices, and Madhukeshwar will correct me if I'm wrong, and that was with the vision of saying that this is what the future is going to be. So it's not even COVID. COVID obviously accelerated it, but even without that, even the best of institutions across the world are looking at ODR as the way of dispute resolving, and I think that gives you some flavor as to what the future might look. Certainly for a whole ocean of disputes, there is no option but ODR. Take, for instance, if I have a problem with my Uber driver, I have 50 rupees of a dispute between them. You can't expect that to be in a physical mode at all. So I think for those kind of disputes, there's just no option but to go online. And even slightly more complex disputes where the requirement to come physically far outweighs the benefit of coming physically is there again, ODR will become the default mechanism. So I think more and more disputes will fall within that bucket. But I certainly think that the canvas is wide enough that ODR portrays for all disputes to be in it. There will always be space for some offline resolution, whether it's in mediation or whether it's in arbitration, but I think that ocean is shrinking.
And Akshetha, would you like to add something more?
Yeah, I think I find it so amusing when we're asked this question, and we're always usually asked this question about, is it for small value? So again, I think the one thing I just want to say is a lot of time has been spent in demonstrating that ODR works. So use cases that we had access to is what a lot of us have worked on, but that really does not mean there is no space for it. And it logically makes so much sense, right? If you are worried about ODR, like the O is what's bothering, high-value mediations have been taking place forever. High-value arbitrations have been taking place forever. So, like, what is the worry, right? Is it that, will it be secure? Will it be safe? There is always, like, honestly, a counter-argument for maybe it is, in fact, safer. Like who's to say that's not true in some cases, right? So really, I think it's just the idea of either our definition of ODR might be something that's a little constrictive, so we're a little worried about it, or because again, like from what Vikas said, I remember when Madhukeshwar had showed us how the documents are kept very securely, and that was way before its time. Like it was insane the level of security that's taken care of, to a point where I remember walking out thinking, I feel like this might be safer than offline. So it really, the how can always be figured out. You can use correct parts of ODR and correct parts of technology to create the best possible result and outcome that you want. So you don't need to see how a small value dispute is being resolved and assume that the exact same process and technology is going to be used for a large scale dispute as well. So there are so many moving parts, and it's not just enterprises, right? You have government bodies, you have this transcription being used in the Supreme Court by Terrace, and there's just so much movement there, and this was such a big move. I remember all of us celebrating it. So you can think of it as ODR has a lot of pieces that you can use, and you can integrate it into maybe smaller parts of your dispute, maybe larger parts of your dispute, but definitely, please take it from us that large disputes can be solved with ODR. It's not something that is shocking or that's new. So it's just a matter of sort of what you want or how you want to integrate it. So I think the only request I would leave with is the why is strong. It's just the how that we might be confused about. And that can be figured out. That's why we all are here. Like together we'd be able to tailor make a solution that works with technology and leveraging collaborative dispute resolution. So let's not question the why. And the how is something that we can always evolve. There's no issues there. Tech evolves really, really fast. So we will have to catch up. All of us will have to catch up. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to add.
I have two follow-up points that come from the few bits that all of you mentioned. One is that one of the factors that all of us as lawyers and because you touched upon this briefly, at least as common law practitioners, one of the bits that we all hold very close to any dispute, any adversarial dispute resolution process is the whole process of recording of evidence. Now, with moving towards an online dispute resolution, be it in terms of, wherever it fits in the spectrum, I'm not saying that at the higher end of the spectrum or lower end of the spectrum, wherever it fits in that spectrum, do you think that relevance and importance of recording of evidence is going to come down with these processes?
Tini, my own personal sense is, I think oral evidence is, the importance of it is overstated. At least in the kind of work I do a lot of construction arbitration. Your case is decided based on documents, not based on whether a particular witness remembers a particular instruction having been given. And I think that holds true for most commercial cases. Of course, when it comes to expert examination, maybe there is some element to the importance of cross-examination because you're trying to discredit them, you're trying to find some lacunae in their case, which is more properly done in an iterative process. But I think barring those cases, generally across board, I think the importance and relevance of oral examination is coming down. Even in existing arbitral tribunals, if you ask arbitrators, are they swayed by what the document said or what happened in that 3 days of cross-examination? 80% of the time, I think they will say they are still going by what the document says. And maybe that 4 days or 5 days or what I recently heard, 21 weeks of trial are more to appease the lawyer than really for the benefit that it is deriving. With that sort of background, I think if you do go into online dispute resolution, number one, it's not that online dispute resolution is reducing the role of witnesses. It's just making it easier for them to participate in a proceeding. There are concerns like, is there witness coaching, tampering? And I think over the course of COVID, people have developed solutions for that as well. Give you an example, in some of the higher value disputes we did, they wanted someone like a witness observer. So we sent someone to sit physically in the room. The question is whether you will send a low value resource, low cost resource, or whether you will ship the entire tribunal with their paraphernalia to that hearing. And what ODR enables is for you to economize. So I don't think inherently that the role of witnesses or the role of cross-examination is going to reduce any more than it is already reducing. If anything, it's probably going to make it more efficient because people now have shorter attention spans as well. So if you're doing a cross-examination in Zoom, you can only see the screen for that amount of time. So people are also trying to reduce their questions, keep it to a little bit more specific questions that they need to attend to, etc. So I think if anything, the change is in the positive direction of making it more efficient. I don't think it's doing away with that process, like I said, beyond what is already happening.
Yeah, I personally agree with you completely there, which is that the relevance of oral evidence is definitely diminishing with time. The other follow-up bit that I had was, Rajneesh, you had made a reference to the whole SEBI framework for online dispute resolution. Where do you see this going? Because, that's of particular interest given that, there is a large kind of disputes that can emerge in that space, and it may not be cookie cutter boilerplate disputes that come in that space. So what do you see or what do you envisage is going to develop from that, and is it going to set a platform and it's going to improve the credibility of this process altogether? Your thoughts?
I think, and kudos to SEBI for doing this. It's the first regulator anywhere globally to adopt ODR for resolving important disputes. And these are, the value of these disputes can be from, and I saw a dispute for 16,400 rupees last week, and it could go up to crores and crores and crores, and severely complex disputes where algorithms are used to buy and sell securities in the Indian markets, to ranging from shareholders' rights and things like that in some of the smaller things. So I mean, it's a supremely progressive step. I see it, as my other panelists also said, as confirming the fact that ODR can be used. There is no reason for ODR not to be used for complex disputes. And just adding to what Vikas had said about witness and witness coaching. Today you already have technologies, and it's used in the education space of proctoring, where you are trying to figure out if a student is fudging their exams. It's already there. You have face reading already prevalent. So I think all of those technologies, when you bring them into the legal system, there is a space and a time, and they will definitely also come into the SEBI disputes as well. And SEBI has a 3-tiered dispute process. You do conciliation number 1 in 16 days or 21 days. If you don't finish, you move on to an ODR, and then within the ODR, the third stage is if the value of the dispute is above a certain amount. So below a certain amount, it is documents only arbitration. Above a certain amount, it's a single arbitrator, and then it's a tribunal of 3 arbitrators. And they can choose to have parties go to any of the centers to give their evidence or whatever else they want to, and then you start adding technologies like face reading, recognition, proctoring. So a lot of the biases go out. So I think what SEBI's done only affirms the power of ODR, and it's only going to grow. I mean, it's not going to stop. It's a regulator betting on the future of the Indian securities markets. I don't think any of us are going to let it fail. We are completely clued into that.
Great. I think I'll just have one point to raise, which is more on the mediation side, because there's a lot being spoken about the new mediation law that has been in the works. How do you see that bringing about a change to the whole practice of it? I mean, what are your quick words on whether it is good, bad, ugly? Where do we go?
I'm sure everyone has a thought on it, and I'm not going to bring it down to good, bad, or ugly. This is something that we've all worked hard towards, and it's pretty amazing that we are at a place where we have an act in place, and it's a huge step forward for the mediation movement. It puts mediation on par with arbitration and, of course, our court system in terms of legal recognition. But in terms of embracing it as a community, we still have a long ways to go, which is where actually measures like, I don't like to use the word, the mandatory mediation is not what I subscribe to, but more efforts where parties are being pushed to understand what the mediation process is. So like a first information kind of meeting is something that would have really benefited in the mindset shift that the larger disputant and legal community needs to use more of mediation. But the big steps forward are, of course, the fact that there's legal recognition. A mediated settlement agreement has the same validity as a court decree. That's huge. All the fundamental tenets of the mediation process are recognized: confidentiality, voluntariness, self-determination. Tick mark there. It promotes private institutional mediation, which I think is huge in supporting the practice to improve. I do believe that we're going to see better mediators coming out of this legislation. It explicitly speaks to government disputes going into mediation, and I think that's a big step for the mediation process. But it's also been, a huge missed opportunity in a couple of various areas. As I mentioned, in supporting mindset shift. When we are in a dispute, our first response is freeze, fight, flight, right? That's the inherent response in a dispute situation. There is also a response that I don't know how many of you are familiar with, called tend and befriend, which is a response of sitting across the table and building understanding to find resolution. It does not come as intuitively as the freeze, fight, flight response. And therefore, we need more of a push to be able to engage that part of our response mechanism and sit across the table and find a consensus in moving forward. So I think that's a big miss. And to a large extent, the Commercial Courts Act did not work because there were big loopholes in the structuring of how do you get parties to understand this process. So if we came up with a mechanism that was well thought through, I do believe that the law could do a lot in orchestrating mindset shift. The first schedule is problematic to me. Many mediatable cases are excluded. Disabilities, environmental disputes, a couple of other professional malpractice kinds of disputes. I think these are great mediatable cases, and they shouldn't be automatically excluded from the mediation table. So, and then of course the fact that we have not used this as an opportunity to harmonize with the Singapore Convention and get international mediations as well under the wing of this current act. So there are some big gaps that do need to be filled, but overall it's a big step forward for the mediation movement in India.
Great. Akshita, anything further you would like to add on this aspect? No. I think it was a very engaging discussion where not only did the panel take us through the practical considerations, but also what the future looks like and where we are headed to. With this, I think we can open it for the audience to raise any questions, and I'm sure the panel will be more than happy to engage on those questions. Yeah, Mayur, you are.
Hi. So my question is actually, I'm Mayuri and I do arbitration, more international arbitration and international dispute resolution. And my question is an extension of what Akshita said. And I think that makes, it was bang on the point that let's not question the why, but let's figure out the how. Now, the why we've been talking about for the last 2 years post-COVID, that, okay, ODR is here to stay, it's here to stay for certain kind of disputes, small value disputes, certain disputes where, certain disputes... Oh, for transcript. Sorry for that.
Thanks, Vikas. So, I think we all have, whether we like to acknowledge it and accept it or not, ODR is here to stay. We all know that it works for certain kind of disputes, small value disputes, where documents only work, securities dispute, your dispute with the Ola, Uber drivers, etc. My comment or question is, for us to make ODR an absolutely non-negotiable when it comes to all kinds of disputes, and when I mean disputes, including disputes which are more relevant for mediation or arbitration, disputes such as investment treaty disputes, construction disputes, high-value joint venture disputes, shareholder disputes, fact-specific dispute. Isn't it important for sort of the proponents of ODR, every one of you on the dais and all of us here, to change our pitch a little bit to say that ODR is effective in all forms of dispute? It could be in document preservation, it could be in our disclosure requirements, it could be in ensuring that through the process until the time of cross-examination of the final hearing, ODR is here to stay. Now, at that moment, the parties need to decide whether it's going to be documents only, ODR based, or it will be a physical hearing. So, I don't know the terminology, but I think the way it would work is ODR, it would be almost like there was this notion of hybrid hearings, which was coming up during COVID. And like Vikas, most of my hearings in the last 2 years, except one of them, has all been online. So, to make ODR sort of a staple in all kinds of dispute, and for all practitioners and for all stakeholders to sort of accept it as a mechanism for sort of redressing all forms of dispute, isn't there a need to sort of change the pitch? Because as soon as you say ODR, a practitioner understands that, yeah, it's for small value disputes, perhaps not for the kind of disputes I do. I'm just challenging sort of the notion of how to pitch it. Thanks.
Hi Mayuri, thank you for that question. Let me talk a little bit about the advantages of ODR, and let us see if that applies to all disputes. And I'll give you an example from our experiences so that there's some anchor around which we can discuss. With ODR, we file documents online. Does that work for all disputes?
Yes.
Even today, in any international arbitration, all documents are filed online. It's a different matter that you spend thousands of dollars couriering it to arbitrators across the world and burning down rainforests in the process. But there is definitely an online filing. Today's online filing is not secure because you're doing it using Dropboxes of the world, your Gmails of the world, because they're not tuned for this. Would you prefer an institution which has as its core technology which ensures that document filing is safe and secure? I think all of us would agree. Number two, once you initiate arbitration, what we do is we try and appoint the neutral, in our case, within 48 hours. That again is done because we have a database of neutrals with their specializations, with over the course of time, them updating their availability on a real-time basis will therefore make for faster appointment of neutrals. Is that something that people would prefer across disputes? I think they would. Of course, it depends on what your panel of arbitrators or the neutrals are. If you have a good enough, a broad enough panel with the most experienced of neutrals coming in, I think there is no reason why people would not go to that institution simply because they're using online mechanisms to vet and appoint this specific neutral. If anything, it increases institutional memory. Today, why is it that someone like an MCI is a preferred institution is because of their knowledge of various arbitrators, various mediators. They know who's good, who's bad, what kind of disputes do they handle. And it is that knowledge that you're actually paying for when you're choosing that institution. Technology just makes that a slightly longer term investment of knowledge so that as and when disputes come, you're able to, you're able to draw on that knowledge and appoint. Thereafter, during the course of arbitration, we've already talked about it. I'm not going to go further into everything from filing of documents to document disclosure, something that you identified. Every time there's a red fern schedule, there is production of documents. Where do you produce those documents? Do you have a data dump? Do you have a data room that you maintain? And if an institution can give you that sort of data localization, security, would you not prefer that? I think you would. Then comes down to the actual hearings itself. Or in fact, even before the hearings, the procedural orders. How do procedural orders get generated? How do attendances get tracked? How are they sent to the parties? How do you ensure that the parties have received all of them? If you're able to get technology to enable all of that to happen and track it centrally, I think that's good for all disputes. Go then to the hearing itself. Conducting hearings physically, I think all ODR institutions allow for it, but even if I were to, for the sake of argument, assume that you only do it online, what category of your disputes are you going to say, absolutely impossible, I cannot do it online? I think, like I said earlier, that ocean is shrinking. So even there, even if ODR did not allow for it, which is not the case, ODR permits it if the parties want it, if the tribunal wants it. But even in that case, I think ODR has the tools for video conferencing facilities, for transcription facilities, for ensuring that that entire process is seamlessly integrated with all of your documents. Imagine during the course of your arguments, how much money you pay Epic and Opus to bring up your documents on screen the minute you refer to it. Imagine if all of those documents were on that central repository, you've made all your notes, and whenever that document comes up on screen, for you, you see your notes. For everyone else, they see the common document that's shared. Isn't that a significant advantage? Is that something that even more complex arbitrations can't do with? I think they will. Generating the award, what ODR institutions also help doing is, we help, at least a lot of us, help create that fundamental draft which has your basics, like when was the dispute filed, who were the parties who attended, when were the hearings conducted, what happened in each of the hearings, they're pre-populated. Would that not also be beneficial to most arbitrations? Of course, with the ability of the tribunal to change that if they want to, because it's in an editable format that it's given to them. I think that will also. So I think it really is about going step by step and thinking, what really is ODR, and checking, does that meet the requirement of complex disputes? And I think it does. And I'm sorry, it is a much longer answer than I would have wanted to give, but I thought it was worth taking you through the journey.
Yeah, but that's the point I'm making, that isn't it then that the pitch should not, somewhere the pitch has to be that ODR is relevant for all disputes, and it's really a hybrid. So in certain situations, you may not want the hearing, you may want the hearing physically, but ODR works for the entire course of the arbitration. So I think when we use ODR, there is somewhere a sort of a mental mind block saying that, okay, it's only in certain disputes. Somewhere we as the users of ODR have to change the pitch that it works in all situations.
I'd like to kind of add to what you just said. I think it's a great point, right? We as human beings like to bucket and label things, and when we say ODR, we have this preconceived notion of what ODR is. When actually, as practitioners, the task before you when you are meeting with a client is to understand what is the forum that fits this fuss.
Yeah.
What is it that your client needs? And the process of strategizing a plan that incorporates all of these,
Yeah.
right? It might incorporate some amount of time with a mediator and then an arbitrator, and it's the how. Before we get a sense of what is the need of the party and what are the forums that you have, the various tools that you have in your toolkit to be able to customize it to that need. And ODR is the how of the various options that are available to you.
I think there was a question on the back end.
Hi, firstly, my name is Pavan Srinivas and I'm an advocate in Bangalore. Vikas, that is extremely cool to see Terrace working in real time, and just before anything else, I'm really glad that Terrace is a lot cheaper than Epic and Opus. Unfortunately, this is the problem I want to highlight. There is a big inertia amongst some of the senior most judges and arbitrators in accepting ODR forms like this. I've suggested this in arbitrations I've done, and the feedback I've got is, look, no, XYZ Chief Justice of India is uncomfortable with the whole idea. And you know this because you've had this on your side as well. So I think the question I have is, Akshetha mentioned we need a push. We need a push towards ODR. Now, especially given that we're talking about mediation, we already have mandatory pre-institution mediation for commercial disputes. Have you examined a push in that sense? If so, can you talk about the how? How do you get the push, especially when there is an inertia amongst some of the senior most members of the country's bar? Because this is a problem with India in specific. I've worked in London with Alan Novri, and I know that there's a lot more acceptance over there. But out here, it's very different. And having come back, I just wondered what you guys do. Like, how do you market yourselves?
No, I think so. There will always be detractors and there will always be supporters, and I think they are, at least in the case of ODR, it's been equal on both sides. We've seen ONDC like this. This is driven by sort of forces within the government to set up the open network digital commerce. ODR is sort of native to the ONDC platform. We are already looking at Sehmati account aggregator, which is 6 months old, I think. Dispute resolution through ODR is native to this. In the latest, and I think this happened about 3 weeks ago, 13th September, if I'm not wrong, in the e-court project, there is a significant amount of money set aside for ODR. So if you look at the visual of that being right in the center, there's a yellow thing which says ODR. So I think it's so the bias that you mentioned or the inertia that you mentioned is there, but there is an equal amount of from the opposing side as well. And as I said in the beginning, right, the train's left the station. If you're not on it, you will have to figure out ways to get onto the train. With SEBI doing what it has done, and I don't know if people know, about 2 years ago, the Reserve Bank of India said there should be an ODR mechanism for resolving disputes in the payment and settlement system space. They haven't turned the screws on it yet, but I'm sure they will at certain point in time. So I think it works on both sides. There will be a little bit of give and take to and fro, but ODR is here. I mean, that's my answer to it. I'm largely a very optimistic person. I know when you know, I think 4 years ago people would ask, what are you guys doing, right? And now people say, how much should we pay you, and how are you doing this? So I think it's changing.
But I think you do raise a very important point, especially when you're talking about institutional mindset changing. It's a tough one, and it requires. We're talking about a combination of having done things in a particular way for years, people being so overwhelmed that they haven't had the chance to pause and understand how to bring about a change. That causes certain sectors to be more resistant to these adoptions, and in our practice, the judiciary plays a very critical role in promoting the practice of mediation, and we continue to work with the judges hugely to help them understand why mediation is their friend, why mediation works in reducing backlog in their dockets. But where I have huge hope and where I see a big change is actually in the younger crop of lawyers working with their clients to try mediation. And that's where the change begins to happen. So whilst there is this resistance, there's also, as Rajneesh said, the whole other ecosystem that's growing of younger lawyers saying, we came into this field for supporting clients to resolution. That's why we came to the law. And the current system does not allow us to do this. We're done. We want to try other systems, which is where these kinds of processes come in to create that change.
Sorry, very quick addition to that one. It's not that the ODR journey has been seamless, even in the context where they've adopted ODR. I'll give you a SEBI example. Once they said ODR is mandatory for securities market transactions, we were supposed to do an orientation for existing arbitrators on these stock exchanges to onboard them onto our platform. We started that call. The first question before our presentation began was, one person said, listen, I want you to promise me one thing. If you appoint me as an arbitrator, I want you to send a hard copy of every single document that has been filed in this case to my house. You promise me, only then I'll let you continue this call. That was 2 weeks ago, right? It is not that this mindset's going to change overnight. It is a process that takes a little bit of time. But I think COVID's given us hope. It really has. Because if you see, the chief justices that you're talking about are all now very happy doing virtual hearings, because now they can do 10 times the number of hearings they would have done earlier, because now they don't have to travel. They don't have to waste time doing it. So we are hoping that that somehow percolates down a little bit more. And if you see Delhi High Court, for instance, I don't see more than 50% of the lawyers carrying files anymore. Everyone carries an iPad and everyone has liquid text. And that also gives you hope that if you give them the right tools, I think people are willing to adopt. And that's the sort of things that some of the ODR players are attempting to do, that we will try and give the lawyers tools. Yes, it's going to take time. Yes, there will be detractors, but I think there's only one way this is going.
Just to quickly add, I think from what Pawan said, so a fellow like optimist in the room, and by no means am I talking about anything political, but just for you to narrow down on just how amazing it was as a project. It's such a great time to be in India doing ODR, and that's something that we just really, really believe. And India is the space where UPI happened, where Aadhaar happened. Again, just think of it as a project to be able to ID so many people in a country like India, whether it's your GST. India is just, it is really a great place to be in to do ODR. You know, even now with the securities market sort of coming in, that's a great sample size. It has scale, and it has the most enthusiastic people about ODR, all of us really plugged in and like making sure this works. So just even the learnings that's going to come out from the next few months, it's going to pave the way for how any other large market would ever want to adopt ODR. And I don't think anyone else will be able to take those kind of strides. So it's always helpful though, as Pawan was mentioning, it's always helpful to have champions in the room though. So if there's just a request that I would leave with is, just don't leave the room today as fence sitters when it comes to ODR, but you know, just championing it is probably what's going to help, because as Tara was saying, right, like a good lawyer now is not necessarily how many wins or losses you have, but how many relationships have you saved, how many conflicts have you avoided. And if we're moving into that direction, then I think this is a great place to be. And it's a great time for ODR.
Just sound like a broken record now, and I say that your arbitration is only as good as your arbitrators. So I can tell you 7 years back when we started to do our annual conference, we made it a point to have transcript, and you rightly said we had Epic and we moved to Terrace, and we're very glad that we have an Indian transcribers who are doing the job right. The difference it has made is that I can tell you if it's an MCIA arbitration, the judges are, when I say judges and arbitrators, are very happy to take transcription. They have no difficulty, right? So it's a systemic change where I think institutions, be it ODR, arbitral institutions, mediation institutions, when they appoint the experts or neutrals or adjudicators, I think the acceptability of what's changing becomes higher as well. So the answer really is that you need to move things to institutions, whichever institutions you may want to do that to.
And thanks, Neeti, for that. Just one. I think there was one more question, and we can take that before.
Yeah, actually, two questions.
Please.
I'm Sushil Shankar. This is probably more for Akshita and Rajneesh and Vikas, because it's probably more towards arbitration. You all spoke about the regulatory framework and how there needs to be a balance between not stifling innovation and at the same time having regulation, and about ring fencing things. But what I feel is all this is possible, and this regulatory framework can only evolve if the end user, that is the parties, if their complaints or their unhappiness about this ODR is brought into the public domain. And one way I can think of that is when your award is challenged, a Section 34. Now, I'm aware that most of these cases, they're very, people who may not be aware of what arbitration is, let alone what is Section 34. And so they're very unlikely to go and challenge their awards. So without giving me, without specifying numbers, if you could just tell us broadly what percentage of your awards, your ODR awards, are actually challenged, and for the regulatory framework to evolve. Because if it's all, otherwise the dirt is just going to go under the carpet and nobody will know what's happening in the ODR world.
So I think I won't be able to give you exact numbers.
No.
But what I do know, I mean, and principally because it's today as the business has evolved, we are largely working for banks and financial institutions, and these are numbers which, I mean, large volume of cases being pushed to the system. But we do see, and Carter, we've done cases, for example, somebody mentioned tech transfer to IT companies. I gave you the contract to create a game for me, and the game had XYZ sort of deficiencies. That went on for us for about 3 months. We gave an award, both the parties agreed, and it was not challenged. So, I mean, take aside the volume cases, and some of them do get appealed, but we haven't seen any, I mean, I can tell you, I have seen 5 cases in the last 6 months which have been challenged in the city civil court in Bangalore. This is one of those small ones, section 34. I haven't seen them go against saying that the ODR process was not right. So that's one, but I'm talking about the other sort of more difficult ones. For example, this gaming
What
thing.
about the volume ones?
Volume 1, I said, I've seen 5 in the last 6 months. And we've got summons from the City Civil Court in Bangalore, please produce your records. We've given them records in digital form with a Section 65B certification, and there's been nothing beyond it, right? We've not been scrutinized overly to say, who are you, where are you from, and things like that. We follow 65B, give it in a digital form, put it in a pen drive, put a seal on top and say, hey, these are the records of the arbitration. And I think it's been smooth that way. I haven't seen anything beyond that, you know. But I think for this audience would be relevant would be cases like, I asked you to create an online game for me, didn't work, I need damages, and so on and so forth, and I won't pay you. That case was decided, it was by consent referred to us, got decided in 3 months or even lesser. Both parties were fine. We've seen some folks coming out of Mumbai on, and again, these are fights over commercial matter. My fees as a BPO not getting paid, again came to us, award given in 3 months or less, and it's not been challenged. We've heard nothing beyond that, and these clients are happy to refer more cases to us. So I don't, because there is no, nature of arbitration is such that it doesn't get reported, and that's changing. For example, SEBI has now mandated that all cases which go through the SEBI process must be reported. How many settled, how many XYZ. Hopefully at some point there will be such kind of reporting for case, but it's all anecdotal. I can tell you 5 in the last 6 months and the ones I've seen otherwise. I haven't seen any overt scrutiny from courts in that sense.
Yeah, likewise for us. We haven't received a summons in a single of our case. We definitely know that our awards have been taken to courts because, for instance, courts in Tamil Nadu require the original to be sent by whoever is printed it to be sent to them. We had to send it, so we know it's gone to courts, but we haven't got anything that's been challenged. But I think you do bring up an important point somewhere in the middle of your question, which is education of the consumers as well. And I think that's something that the ODR players do a lot more than typical conventional arbitration processes. For instance, when we send out a notice of arbitration, we translate them into multiple languages so that you understand what it is that you're getting into. And we tell them, if you don't have access to technology, you don't have access to internet, let us know, give us a phone call, we'll arrange some way for you to participate in the process. So we really do a lot to bring the disputants onto the table, and rather than just publish ex parte awards. That's certainly been my experience with at least the ODR players on this panel. So investor education, consumer education is an integral part of the processes that we are doing. Also, I can speak personally, we are very conscious of the kind of disputes we do as well. Unilateral appointments has been a problem in the recent past. Therefore, we as an institution in the last few months have taken an active call not to do unilateral appointment cases except where the parties consent. So it's also something that we're evolving to ensure that we don't just become rubber stamps. And we wear as a badge of honor that at least in 10 cases that I know of, in our institutions, the case has been ruled against the claimant. And these are banks. Imagine if a case has been ruled against them. That should give you some sense of the independence that we hold our arbitrators to. In fact, the arbitrators came and asked us, listen, I think in this particular case, they don't have enough documents. We might have to rule against them. I said, please do. It is you who are making that decision. You are ultimately who is independent, and therefore that is of primal importance to us. All of this just to give you a sense that, yes, there is an asymmetry in terms of awareness. We are trying to bridge that. ODR institutions are genuinely trying to be neutral. We are not being rubber stamped. And in terms of cases, we have not seen the courts being particularly intrusive and setting aside our awards, at least in our panel. That's been our experience.
Sorry, just to add, I mean, translations, multiple languages, IVRs, QR codes, requesting respondents to come and join the proceedings. If a respondent does not have access to a Zoom, can I create another tech solution where a respondent can just, on a simple feature phone, just log into the call and hear what's happening? Can I translate from X language to Y? So these are a number of steps we are already doing to bring inclusiveness into the system. And similarly, we've had where cases have gone against banks because stamp duty is not paid. The last page of the agreement is missing, which had the arbitration clause. Signatures are missing. I think a lot of us, the fact that we are lawyers, we are aware of all of these. There's a very high standard we put on ourselves as well. To say that for an institution, for an award to be set aside because of a reason of not being inclusive is just anathema for all of us. I mean, I can very safely say that for all the institutions.
Thank you to the wonderful panel.
1 second, I have a second question.
You have a second question.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
We are running short of time, so thank you to the wonderful panel. And I should say that this is one of those panel discussions where you end the discussion with such an optimistic high note, because you've had 4 panelists here who are all very, very optimistic about the future of the online dispute resolution, or on how mediation is here to change the way people look at dispute resolution. Thanks to all of you for taking the time and being part of this very enlightening discussion.
And thank you to MCI. As I said, this is the 3rd year running. They've been consistently being focused on ODR. I mean, it's heartening to see an institution take that step. Thank you so much.